Tauschek.
Here.
Herman.
Here.
Mansdorf. Here. Gilson.
Here.
Hildebrand.
Here.
Penquitz.
Here.
Binder.
Here.
Nelson.
Here.
We have a quorum, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from December 10th, 2024. Chair will entertain a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
We have a first and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the discussion on dogs in parks. Say that one 3 times fast. And Tim, I think I'll call on you to give us a little FYI on it, and then we'll proceed with Chief.
You know, I'm going to give just a very brief FYI. Essentially, we've had some items where we've had folks asking, can we have dogs in parks? They've seen dogs in parks. I don't want to steal Chief's thunder too much. So the goal is to right-size the ordinance to what is actually happening today. So with that, I'm going to introduce Chief Ruggles.
Good evening. So basically, this is really just, we hope, a corrective issue at this point. It's currently the city's practice to have dogs allowed in parks. That's what we've been doing. We have constructed a dog park in Sayer Park. We have dispensers for bags to help people clean up after them. We even have signage indicating please clean up after your dog in the park. Unfortunately, our ordinances are still a little out of date to that effect. There's 2 sections of city ordinance, section 718, animals restricted on public grounds and cemeteries, and section 1211, park regulations, under B19, that pets are not permitted in any city park except in connection with events specifically approved by the park board or common council. So those 2 sections kind of place the police department in a no man's land as far as enforcement. We are providing services and locations for dogs, but at the same standpoint, our ordinance still say that they shouldn't be there. We haven't had too many incidents. We have had just 1 or 2 minor complaints over the period of time. Normally, the complaint isn't that the dog is in the park, it's that the behavior of the dog in the park is the issue. And so tonight, we are recommending that if council feels it appropriate to modify those 2 sections of city ordinance to allow canines to be in the city parks, provided they are kept leashed as is required by our ordinance on other public property, that they not be permitted to harass, run loose, or interfere with other visitors or animals in the park. And we are suggesting, although this is not required, that they not be permitted on public playgrounds, just to avoid that hazard to small children. We also would request that no dog deemed dangerous or vicious under our ordinance be allowed on a city park, since that way we will avoid other hazards. That is currently covered under section 716 of our ordinance. And finally, owners of canines be responsible to remove any waste material per the section that's already existing, 7115. This would align all of our practices and our ordinances together at the current time. We feel it would be prudent, and so we bring this forward for discussion.
Thank you, Chief. I can see where the department is in a quandary of trying to do policing and be discretionary at the same time, which can be confusing not only to the officer but to the public. And as I read through this, there are definitely some conflicts, and to fix that, I think, is a good idea. I would assume that in the dog park designation area there, because it is fenced in, they can still be let loose and run about. Correct.
I would agree with that. We did not specifically put that into ordinance, although there could be an exception. Again, a lot of this will require some wording, and I would think some interpretation by our attorney before it would be brought forward as an amended ordinance.
Yeah.
Correct. Once we get direction from council, we'll work with Attorney Bieber. I think that's good to call out the dog park as an area that would be off leash.
You know, that is kind of a unique situation, and I do see them running loose in there, which is, you know, what it's built for. So that, Alderman Hildebrand, you had a question?
I had the same question. Somehow read that into the new ordinance, that they're free to roam. Yeah, but they have to be watched, observed, and no interactions.
Is it in the budget to get more signage in dog waste containers? Because especially if we're gonna have, where they can be in a park, but they can't be in a playground, you're gonna need signage on that, or that's gonna be an issue.
Currently not budgeted. I think we could price something like that and present it out to council if needed.
And if there are dog waste containers, we're obviously gonna need a lot more if all the parks are now gonna let them in. Are you
Okay.
asking for them to be in cemeteries too? Is that still considered a park, or?
No, we are not. The only intent right now would be to modify the ordinance for the public parks, not to change the cemeteries or other locations. Unless, again, this is open to the council's will at this point. So we're simply making the request for the parks. It's, nothing else has come to my attention that they've been, you know, freely roaming cemeteries or anything like that.
Well, Union Cemetery, which would be one of the cities, because I see it every day across from my house, but everybody does walk their dog through it, so I don't know. I mean, they're not running between the headstones, but the walk. So I was just
I'm
curious.
not aware of any complaints we've had to that effect, but yes, again, it's in violation of ordinance,
Yeah.
but we haven't been enforcing, and so we're kind of, if it's the intent that cemeteries be also allowed, so be it. Again, I think the cleanup would probably be the biggest issue in a cemetery.
Alderman Golston?
Would there be something in there about dogs being muzzled?
So
It's-
currently, it's required for vicious or dangerous animals that they be muzzled on public, whenever they're off the owner's property. There's actually, under ordinance, a vicious animal cannot be kept in the city of Plymouth. Once it's deemed vicious, it must be removed. There's a process we have to go through to remove the animal. A dangerous animal must be muzzled anytime it's off property, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, I'm getting a nod from my expert over here. So. I thought I had those two correct. It's dangerous are permitted once deemed dangerous, but there's additional requirements in our ordinance to ensure the safety of that dog anytime it's away from the owner's property. Once it's deemed vicious, then there's actually a process. We either require the owner to dispose of the animal, or we have to seize it and do the same.
Alderman
I
Nelson?
would say if we want to clarify things for cemeteries, I'd recommend that we say that dogs must remain on paved surfaces only, so they're not sprinkling gravestones, and be leashed. But at least that would clarify things so people know they're not allowed to go on the grass at all. Does that make sense?
I'm wondering if they shouldn't be on paved areas in all the parks.
There aren't paved areas in all the parks.
Huh?
There aren't paved areas in all the parks.
There's only walkways.
Well, that's what
So-
walkways, just on walkways, because then they're not getting in where all the people are, in the grassy areas. Like at Myers Park where you have that golf course, you know, you'll see dogs running around down there. And, you know, what if one bites somebody, or what if it's a designated a vicious dog and he gets down there and bites somebody, then what happens? Do you go back to the homeowner and say you had a vicious dog?
Well, it should be leashed to the homeowner.
So again, we're asking that no vicious dogs, once they're deemed vicious, which is the process we have to follow, none of them be allowed on any of the previously established public property.
And that's up to the homeowner,
That is up to the dog owner, correct?
the dog
Yes,
owner, the
yes,
dog owner.
Yes, that they are not required. We would have to have I believe a section that stipulates exactly that. There's already ordinance covering the vicious or dangerous dogs. The question is now to say that they are not permitted in a park unless muzzled as per the other ordinance, and point back to the dangerous dog ordinance.
So if that dog owner let the dog in a park and it bit somebody, then the dog owner would be liable.
He would be in violation of our local ordinance
Yeah.
under the vicious dog ordinance.
Yeah.
That's what we would cite them under. And then, yes, obviously liability and everything, you know, currently, one of the requirements for a dangerous dog is they must carry liability insurance on a dog. I believe it's a $300,000 policy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it used
So
to
it's
be a
not
$1 million
small.
policy that got changed a few years ago down to 350,000.
And what happens if a non-vicious dog bites somebody in a park?
It's no different than a non-vicious dog biting someone on a public sidewalk. We would cite the owner for dog running at large if need be, or for, again, depending on the bite, the type of bite actually is what determines the dangerous or vicious in a lot of situations. It's the level of injury. I believe it's if a serious injury requiring stitches or something like that, or to the face or neck area, it automatically can go to the vicious side of it. Less than that is normally deemed dangerous, and again, there is some discretion in how we prosecute it. So a minor nip that maybe doesn't break skin or only causes a scratch may not be deemed dangerous, whereas a dog that repeatedly is attacking people on the street, even if it's not causing injury, I think there is a provision for that.
Also, for any dog bite that happens within the city of Plymouth, there's a 10-day quarantine that has to happen with that dog. So within that 10-day period, that dog needs to be quarantined, whether at home, away from any other animals, or at a veterinary clinic for 10 days. Within that 10 days, that animal has to be seen by a vet to make sure that, you know, it's up to date on its shots, that it doesn't have any kind of reactions to the bite. So there's a whole lot that goes into it. If the dog owner doesn't comply with that, then that dog owner is actually committing a misdemeanor crime. So there's a whole bunch that leads into it.
Do we see a lot of dog bites?
No, we had one fairly recently that was somewhat more severe, and so therefore we've been dealing with the dangerous aspect of that dog. It was deemed, we're working to deem it dangerous, so that's why we know some of these numbers and figures off our head because we just dealt with it. Matt may know more to heart. Like I said, I just reviewed all this and then in the process of making this request. Again, the vicious is different. The vicious, per ordinance, is not allowed in Plymouth. So once we deem it vicious and it goes through the process there, or the owner doesn't contest it, then we go through a process to require them to either dispose of the animal appropriately, or we have to seize it and follow through on the legal process there. Dangerous, again, the lesser of the two. Dangerous is permitted within the city of Plymouth, but anytime off property must be under control, must be muzzled. There's additional requirements. So. And again, a lot of that is stipulated already in ordinance. So I would say if we point the ordinance back that we don't allow dangerous or vicious animals, period, in the city park, even if muzzled, we're just gonna say no because of the propensity there. So I will say that there's comment about grassy areas versus paved areas. I think a lot of dog owners take dogs to parks specifically to get them off paved surfaces and sidewalks and such, with the opportunity to run on grass and a more natural surface. I think that's the intent, so a word of caution, I guess, there, that if we keep it only on paved surfaces, in a park at least, it may defeat the purpose of what we're trying to do for dog owners.
Yeah, I think, you know, during the summer, you know, Thursday nights when the band is playing up at, you know, at the city park, you're gonna see numerous people with their little poodles or whatever else, and they're more in the grassy area. And again, I just kind of think, you know, if you limit that, you might hurt attendance, and again, we don't want to handicap people to not show up to our events because of that.
The other thing is there is an exemption that we would want to continue for service animals. So if somebody has a seeing eye dog or something like that, we would want to continue that exemption throughout the ordinance, just like it currently is. So we're not banning service animals from people that need them.
And so they'd still have to be leashed unless they were in the dog park. And then in the ordinance already, is it a certain foot length for?
6 foot and less deemed dangerous, then it shortens to 4, if I'm not mistaken.
Alder Hildebrand?
I think there's gotta be a little recommendation of maybe an A or a B in there for graveyards. You know, during funerals, they usually have their dog there. If there's one that's last, also visitation. I know even I have friends that take that dog and visit the gravesite. So I think that if something's gonna be added in on the graveyards, you know, if you can make that like an A and B or something.
Alder Bender, you had a question?
What's the definition of leash? If I bring my dog to the park to do my frisbee golf, can I tie it to a tree and go about my game? The dog is leashed.
But not under the control of the person.
That's part of what,
If I'm remembering correctly, our leash section of ordinance requires it to be under the control of the person who's capable of controlling that vehicle. So like a 3-year-old is not considered capable of controlling a Rottweiler, let's say a full-grown Rottweiler. So in addition to the leash actually being held by a person, the person has to be able to control it.
Yeah, that's what it states in A.
I believe there was something, or language to that effect to avoid that kind of a problem.
Okay.
And again, my intent is to point back to our already existing ordinances, not rewrite all of them where we don't need to, simply make reference to them in the appropriate place so that we're not rewriting everything, we're simply modifying the fewest number of sections of our ordinance to allow for what we're currently doing. And obviously, any other wishes, again, the cemetery was not on our radar, so if there is a clear direction you want us to put in there for cemeteries, we would definitely want to touch on that.
Unfortunately, sometimes you end up with one dog owner who is a little more careless than others, and it makes it difficult for everybody because you have one bad apple in the barrel, and we can't single one out. So modifying it to an appropriate level of enforcement. We can't put an officer in every park and every cemetery 24/7 to monitor, you know, dogs.
Again, my opinion, enforcement is behavior-based. So we look at what is the behavior and what actions occurred before we take enforcement. So in that regards, I think it is appropriate for us to single out the person who's clearly violating ordinance for enforcement. That's our job to me as a police officer. So I would say, yes, we should single out the bad actor, but we need the tools to do it correctly. Right now, the tools are just blanket, no dogs in park per ordinance, and so we're not enforcing it because there was clearly an intent to allow people to enjoy the park with their dogs. And so we're just trying to align the two things, have the tools to that when we do have a bad actor. We've spelled out the actions we don't want those animals in the parks, as opposed to simply banning them entirely.
Diane?
I do agree that no dogs on grass area would be kind of overkill.
I think it defeats the purpose.
Right.
I think that's a lot of why people bring dogs to parks, is room to roam on a natural surface. So, especially where they may not have large grassy yards themselves.
And I think too, if we make the change in the ordinance, if in a year we revisit it because there's dog waste left and, you know, dogs that are being mean, we can always revisit it and make a
Yeah.
change.
And
It's a tweaking process.
I would actually say the complaint of dog waste is more prevalent than dog bites or even the bad behavior necessarily at most parks. There have been a few phone calls about dogs, being on a playground with small children, knocking them over, doing things like that. We haven't necessarily had a bite on a playground, but we've had larger dogs knock over smaller children and things. Whereas the dog waste seems to be a more frequent, especially spring, summer. Obviously, we get more phone calls potentially that there's excessive waste in a park and people aren't cleaning them up. So, and again, we would point back to the ordinance we already have that says, well, public park is public property and you're required to clean up just like you are anywhere else, sidewalk, city street, right? Whatever else that there is, it's currently in ordinance. So,
Well, it's a work in process, and any comments that the council might have, I would suggest they get those to Tim so he can kind of consolidate them and work with the chief on any rewrite section as it deems necessary and bring it back to us in a working form, and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much. A touchy subject, but certainly one that could do with some revisions possibly. Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a first.
Most people are pretty good.
Oh, yeah, they are.